Are different type of addictions harder to quit than others? I have quit a few things in my life, and nicotine is by far the hardest. By far. Alcohol and benzos are the only addiction that can actually kill you if you go cold turkey. Opiates can also do that, but it's very rare. Alcohol withdrawal has the highest mortality rate out of those three, so I'd say alcohol is the worst. It's hard to compare difficulty of quitting addictions. Some, like opioids, cause intense physical withdrawals. Others, like a porn addiction, are free and readily available. So how do you compare the difficulty of those between two different people? Even if you say they are proportionally equally addicted, some people are better at fighting addiction than others. One person can quit a full-blown addiction cold turkey, where another relapses over and over. I've been addicted to a lot, and vaping nicotine was probably the hardest. I quit cigarettes with a vape, then almost died metaphorically coming off the vape. I had to clinch down and grit through it like a motherfucker. I have quit weed, alcohol, nicotine, nitrous oxide, and am trying to quit porn. Nicotine and porn by far the hardest. Never tried to quit meth, heroin, cocaine, crack. I'm pretty overweight and could probably stand to quit sugar, but one thing at a time. Everything is personal. Though alcohol withdrawal is one of the only things that can kill you from the withdrawal alone. Nicotine is much harder to quit for most people because it is so engraved into their daily habits. Drinking impairs you more so than smoking a cigarette, and people associate cigarette smoking with just about everything under the sun. And while recently it's been a bit better, smoking is pretty socially acceptable in comparison to being a heavy drinker. Nicotine withdrawal lasts 72 hours physically, and then after that is all mental. It's per person. For me, nicotine was easier to quit than alcohol. I also had asthma before, that could a factor in why it was so easy for me to quit smoking. Benzos and alcohol can kill you if you quit cold turkey as a result of physical dependency. They are in a class of their own in that regard as far as drugs go. To add to the discussion, the difficulty level varies by person. I lived with my brother and his GF lived with him. We all three smoked. Same brand, same frequency. We would go out on the porch and smoke together. We all three decided to quit smoking for New Year's. My brother and I had a rough day. She had a rough week. Like really rough. She was not at all pleasant to be around. My brother and I essentially dropped it and didn't look back. Ultimately, she went back to smoking. She did quit before getting pregnant. Fast forward to today and she is a blatant alcoholic. I see my brother drink too much sometimes, but I also see him sober more than not. She always has a drink in her hand. I would have to say, so like quitting porn is probably easier than quitting heroin. On a side note, I think nicotine is much harder to quit than alcohol from personal experience. One issue is availability. Grocery stores in my state now sell beer and wine, and it took me like a month of binging to learn how to control myself there. And now some movie theaters sell hard alcohol. You can turn a corner in a place you've been 100 times and BAM. Suddenly there is a shelf alcohol staring you in the face. Kids' B-day parties. Restaurants. You suddenly find triggers you never knew about. I knew a counselor who got off heroin because he was in Italy and couldn't score because he didn't know how to ask for drugs. A lot of it is environmental. Someone who has friends who smoke is probably going to find it harder to quit nicotine than alcohol. Someone who goes to a bar with his friends every weekend is going to find it harder to quit alcohol than cigarettes. A substance being addictive makes it harder to quit, but I know people who have quit drugs and replaced it with non-addictive things that are far more serious addictions and do more damage to their lives. I used to be addicted to video games and now I take it seriously. I have to treat it like an actual addiction or else I'll do nothing else all day. I have people who hold me accountable and daily limits. Video games, weed, sex, TV, knitting, phone calls, practically anything can be an addiction. People like to clown on people who quit masturbation because they don't understand it's not that masturbation is bad, it's that anything can be an addiction if you have enough of an unhealthy relationship with it. Like it may seem silly to say knitting can be an addiction, but when people obsess over something because it's helping them ignore real-world problems, it can snowball. When someone stops bathing, paying bills, talking to people, or taking care of their kids because of a hobby, it's not really a hobby anymore. The legal, common ones are the hardest, like alcohol. I think it really depends on why you're quitting. My husband went into hospital, out 5 days later, and didn't even want a drop of alcohol after being the guy who got up and proceeded to drink the whole day. They detoxed him and he realized the alcohol nearly killed him. Has had one beer with me a few months back. Oh, and I told him we'd be over if he went back to it. It's been almost 2 years. Yes. Nicotine was incredibly hard to stop, and my wife still smokes, so the availability is there. I probably tried a dozen times before it stuck. I had to temporarily stop drinking because after a few drinks I would cave to a cigarette. After about a month I was able to drink occasionally without smoking. It's now been over a year. I still drink, but for the month where I was abstaining from both, nicotine was harder. I've been told on here that chemical addictions are harder to quit than behavioral addictions, because chemical withdrawals can cause your body to torture itself with sickening or burning sensations till you feed it again. I have internet addiction for like 5 or 10 years. There is no way I can live without the internet in this modern age. Sex and electricity. Alcohol would be harder in your example because the withdrawals can literally kill you. Not the case with tobacco. It all depends on how your body reacts to not having something it needs that would dictate its severity.